Jack Monroe stood before the dark screen of his home office, the quiet hum of Charleston's night creeping in through the partially open window. In that moment, a seemingly insignificant detail, the sudden change in the password on his wife Clarissa's phone, sent shockwaves through his disciplined mind. Jack, a former military intelligence officer turned security consultant, had built his career on noticing the small, overlooked details. Details that now hinted at a betrayal that would shatter the foundations of his perfect life. It all began in the historic yet ever-evolving city of Charleston, South Carolina. The charm of old-world architecture and a thriving art scene formed a subtle but vibrant backdrop to the Monroe family's life. Their stately Victorian home nestled on Ashley Avenue had been passed down through generations and symbolized the proud legacy of the Monroe family. This house was not merely a structure. It was a repository of memories, secrets, and long-held family pride. For Jack, it was the fortress where discipline and order reigned, a place where his logical, measured approach to life harmonized with the weight of history. At 43, Jack had achieved what many aspired to: a successful security consulting firm, financial stability, and a stable marriage to Clarissa Monroe, a spirited artist whose vibrant presence once brought warmth and color into the otherwise structured life Jack meticulously maintained. They had two beautiful children, Ellie 12 and Ben 10, who were the center of Jack's universe. Yet as the years passed, the relentless demands of his career left him at home, less often, a fact that began to widen the emotional distance between him and Clarissa. For a long time, Jack had dismissed the initial signs of change. Clarissa's increasing absences, her frequent visits to the local arts center, and even her subtle remarks about his physical absence from family events were brushed off as the sacrifices one must endure when one commits to success. But when Jack discovered the email draft on Clarissa's account, a message outlining plans for divorce, custody of their children, and strategies to claim the family home, his meticulously controlled world began to crumble. The revelation hit Jack like a well-placed intelligence tip. He had always prided himself on his analytical skills, his ability to remain calm and detached in the face of chaos. Yet as he read those words, a cold determination set in. Clarissa had stepped out of line. She had betrayed the trust that underpinned their entire life together. It wasn't mere infidelity. There was a calculated intent in her plans, a strategic move in a game of power and legacy that Jack had never anticipated. Instead of confronting her head-on, Jack decided to retreat momentarily into the shadows of his own mind. He became a silent observer, gathering information as he once did on covert operations. Every missed family dinner, every unexplained evening at the Arts Center, and every soft conversation over the phone between Clarissa and a mysterious man named Nathan began to piece together an unsettling puzzle. Nathan, the new director at the art gallery where Clarissa frequently volunteered, emerged as the central figure in this burgeoning affair. His polished charm and ever-present smile were a stark contrast to Jack's own measured stoicism, and he quickly became the symbol of the betrayal Jack now faced. In the solitude of his studies, surrounded by monitors displaying remote feeds from the home's security system, technology that even Clarissa had never bothered to understand, Jack began mapping out his next steps. The breakthrough came as the quiet buzz of the computer filled the room. A series of files indicating not only the existence of an extramarital relationship, but also detailed plans by Clarissa to claim full custody of Ellie and Ben, along with control of the cherished Monroe Legacy Trust that governed ownership of their family home. The scale of the betrayal was profound. Clarissa's drafted email revealed a calculated plan by portraying Jack as an absent, indifferent father. She aimed to win sympathy from the court and seize control of everything Jack held dear. It was a cold, methodical operation, and Jack realized that this was not a moment of impulsive passion, but of strategic planning, a move orchestrated by someone who believed she had been wronged, yet was willing to sacrifice the very legacy that had defined their family's history. Realizing that a direct confrontation would only play into her hands, Jack chose instead a different path. He resolved to step back to allow her to believe that she was in control. He decided to retreat from the family home, relocating temporarily to a modest apartment in downtown Charleston. This calculated withdrawal was not an act of surrender, but rather the opening move in a far more elaborate counter-strategy. As he packed his belongings and said a quiet goodbye to the halls echoing with shared memories, Jack's heart remained steeled by the resolve to reclaim what was rightfully his. In that quiet moment of departure under a full moon, casting long shadows on the historic pavement, the fault line in Jack Monroe's life solidified. The betrayal had not just fractured a marriage, it had ignited a burning desire to restore dignity, justice, and most importantly, family. The stage was set, and as he drove away from the mansion that had once symbolized all that was stable and true, Jack knew that the battle for his legacy was only just beginning. 3 weeks after leaving his home on Ashley Avenue, Jack Monroe sat in a dimly lit coffee shop 2 blocks from the Charleston Art Collective, the upscale gallery where Clarissa had begun spending most of her days and increasingly her nights. A steaming mug sat untouched in front of him, the bitter scent of over-roasted beans rising into the air, but his attention was fixed on the figure across the street, Nathan Bell. Nathan had that easy kind of charisma Jack had seen before in intelligence files, shoulders relaxed, designer stubble, a warm smile that seemed tailored to its target. Today he wore a fitted navy blazer over a black t-shirt and loafers with no socks, the uniform of someone who wanted to appear cultured without trying too hard. Clarissa had always admired people who seemed effortlessly present. Jack, by contrast, had always lived one step ahead. For the last 2 weeks, Jack had shadowed Nathan through proxies, private surveillance teams discreetly planted at the gallery, financial analysts, combing through public records, even a contact in D.C., helping pull dormant aliases from old arrest logs. What he found wasn't just damning, it was pathological. Nathan Bell wasn't Nathan Bell. He had changed his name twice in the last decade, first from Noah Barrett in 2010, and then again in 2016, after a quiet scandal at a Miami art house involving a forged Basquiat and a missing trust fund. Jack's contacts discovered civil suits settled out of court in Austin, New York, and Philadelphia. The pattern was clear. Nathan targeted emotionally vulnerable women with access to money, wormed his way into their lives under the guise of artistic partnership, and then vanished with assets just before things unraveled. Inside the coffee shop, Jack flipped open a leather-bound notebook, not for notes, but for appearances. If Nathan or one of his gallery staff spotted him, he wanted to look like just another remote-working Charleston professional. But the game playing out was far from casual. Across the street, Nathan welcomed a wealthy donor couple into the gallery room, offering Clarissa a lingering touch on the lower back as she passed by. Jack's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He knew this playbook: proximity, performance, possession. What Nathan didn't know was that Jack wasn't just watching. He was already working. Jack's true war room wasn't the coffee shop or his temporary apartment. It was the sealed space behind the library shelving at Monroe Legacy, now accessible only by fingerprint. There he had compiled files not just on Nathan's identity and aliases, but on every past lawsuit, every shady art deal, and every woman's name tied to his pattern. Jack wasn't just collecting dirt, he was building a bulletproof narrative. But Jack also knew courtrooms didn't run on instinct. They ran on perception. And right now, the perception being painted, especially to Judge Patricia Lowell, was that Jack was distant, disinterested, and maybe even unstable. It wasn't enough to expose Nathan. Jack had to become undeniable. That's why just days earlier, Jack had intentionally shown up late to a mediation hearing, sending his junior attorney in his place. Clarissa's smug expression in the courtroom gallery had been exactly what Jack hoped for. Let her think he was folding. Let her believe he was too tired, too broken, too distracted. All while the wheels turned behind the scenes. He had started laying the groundwork with Judge Lowell weeks ago, not through manipulation, but through an unexpected connection. The judge's son, Sergeant Aaron Lowell, had been killed during Operation Iron Veil, the same mission that earned Jack his Silver Star. One afternoon at the Arlington National Cemetery, Jack saw her standing alone by a grave and simply said, "He was a good man." We tried to bring them all home. That was it, nothing more. But in the silence that followed, something unspoken passed between them. A shared grief, a mutual understanding. Since then, they had crossed paths 3 more times, once at a veterans fundraiser, another at a civic planning forum where Jack donated his firm's services to a local homeless shelter. Never about the case, never inappropriate. But Jack knew enough about people to recognize when someone was listening, even if they weren't speaking. The critical moment came when he had his legal team reactivate the Monroe Legacy Family Trust, a quiet legal mechanism placed into dormancy when he and Clarissa married. His grandfather's trust documents included an unusual clause: in the event of divorce, the house would automatically revert to the blood heir unless legally claimed through an active marital trust. Clarissa had never known about it. She hadn't needed to, until now. Back in the coffee shop, Jack glanced at his watch. Nathan was shaking hands with a new investor. Clarissa beamed at his side. It looked from the outside like the perfect partnership. Jack took one last look, closed his notebook, and slipped away without being seen. The trap was still under construction, but the bait had been set. That night, in the security room behind the library wall, Jack reviewed audio pulled from hidden microphones he'd installed years ago in the house, devices Clarissa had never cared to understand. On one recording, Nathan's voice floated through the speakers. "You're doing great, babe. Just a few more weeks, and it'll all be yours. The kids, the house, hell, maybe even the trust fund if he doesn't wake up." Jack hit pause. The words echoed in the dimly lit room. He didn't flinch, didn't rage, didn't curse. He simply opened a folder, added a time-stamped transcription, and leaned back in his chair. War wasn't loud, not always. Sometimes it was quiet steps in a familiar hallway. Sometimes it was surveillance feeds and legal loopholes. And sometimes it was just waiting patiently until your enemy stepped exactly where you wanted them to. And Jack Monroe was very, very patient. Clarissa Monroe had always imagined the day she would reclaim the house on Ashley Avenue as triumphant. The chandeliers lit jazz humming from vintage speakers, the smell of catered hors d'oeuvres wafting through the kitchen she once redesigned. That evening, as Charleston's spring air carried the sounds of laughter and wine glasses clinking, she stood in the middle of her living room, now devoid of Jack's presence, and smiled. Outside, the garden glowed with string lights. Neighbors' parents from the kids' school, and even a few potential donors for Nathan's gallery expansion mingled freely. Nathan played the host effortlessly, arm around Clarissa's waist, charming everyone with his plans for an international exhibition that would put Charleston on the global art map. Clarissa beamed with pride. She had weathered the storm. She had won. Jack, she was certain, had given up. His absence at hearings, the lackluster performance of his young lawyer, his move to a generic apartment in the city, all signs of a man defeated. Even the judge, Patricia Lowell, seemed to accept the reality Clarissa had so carefully curated, that Jack was emotionally absent and professionally obsessed, a man who had abandoned his family for his career. Clarissa's invitation to Jack for the housewarming party had been a flourish of theatrical cruelty. A handwritten card slipped through his mail slot. "Come see what you've lost. The kids miss you, even if I don't." To her surprise, Jack showed up. At precisely 8:30 p.m., he stepped through the front door wearing a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, too perfectly, for someone supposedly falling apart. He held a small gift bag, nodding politely to guests as if he belonged. For a brief second, Clarissa's breath hitched, but she quickly replaced it with a mask of casual superiority. "I didn't expect you to actually come," she said with a smile that showed too much teeth. Guests nearby hushed to listen. "You invited me," Jack replied calmly. That's when the knock came. A uniformed sheriff's deputy stepped through the open doorway behind Jack, envelope in hand. The party stilled. Clarissa raised an eyebrow. "Clarissa Monroe?" the deputy asked. "Yes." He handed her the envelope. "You're being served with a no trespassing order effective immediately." The room went quiet. Clarissa laughed, confused. "This is my house. You must be joking." "Not according to these documents," the deputy said. "The owner of record has issued a formal request for all unauthorized individuals to vacate." Clarissa tore open the envelope, her face flushing. "This is insane. The court awarded me the house." Jack turned toward the guests with a practiced ease. "Would you mind giving us a few moments of privacy?" But they didn't leave. They couldn't. The spectacle was too fascinating. A sleek black SUV pulled up outside. Elizabeth Granger, Jack's new attorney, stepped out carrying a leather folio. She moved through the front yard like a prosecuting angel, heels clicking against the stone walkway. The house was never part of the marital assets, she announced to the room. The Monroe Legacy Trust, established in 1971, was temporarily suspended during marriage. Upon divorce, it reactivates and assigns sole ownership to the blood heir, Jack Monroe. Clarissa's jaw dropped. That trust was dormant. It was refiled and revalidated weeks ago. With new documentation signed by Judge Lowell, Elizabeth said evenly. "Per the updated clause, the house reverts to Mr. Monroe immediately. You have until noon tomorrow to remove your personal belongings." "This is a trick," Clarissa hissed. "A stunt." "You'll regret this." "No," Clarissa, Jack said gently. "You'll regret assuming I wasn't paying attention." "Teddy, no." Nathan grabbed her arm and whispered frantically. "We need to leave, tonight." As guests awkwardly began to gather their things, Ellie and Ben stood frozen on the staircase, confusion on their faces. Ellie called out, "Dad, what's happening?" "Mom said you gave us up," Clarissa snapped. "Back upstairs. Now." But Jack stepped forward, kneeling slightly to meet his daughter's eyes. "That's not true, sweetheart. I never left you. I've been here the whole time." Clarissa lunged, but Jack stopped her with a single sentence. "I filed for emergency custody reconsideration. We have a hearing at 9 a.m. tomorrow." Clarissa's fury boiled over. "You can't do this. You disappeared." "I have affidavits," Jack said, "from teachers, coaches, and doctors. I've been at every school conference, every doctor's visit. I have receipts. You have stories." Nathan tugged at Clarissa again, urging her to pack. That night, Jack watched from his car as they loaded suitcases and canvases into Nathan's Range Rover. His phone buzzed. A blocked number. "Please stop this," Nathan's voice pleaded. We can work something out. The kids need stability. Jack paused. You should have thought about stability before moving into my house and trying to erase me from their lives. What do you want? Nathan asked, desperation rising. Jack didn't hesitate. I want you gone by sunrise. And if you ever speak to Clarissa or my children again, what comes next will make tonight feel like a mercy. Click, as Nathan drove off into the night with Clarissa beside him, her face pale, her hands shaking. Jack turned his eyes toward the lit windows of the home he had reclaimed. Inside, Ellie and Ben waited. This was never about vengeance. This was about correction. By sunrise, Jack Monroe stood at the front porch of the Monroe Legacy House, coffee in hand, watching the Range Rover disappear down Ashley Avenue. His children were inside, still curled up under comforters in their old bedrooms, the scent of familiarity slowly returning to the home after months of quiet absence. It was over. Phase 1 at least. Inside the house felt different. Not because the furniture had changed, Clarissa had barely altered anything despite her claims of reclaiming it, but because the energy had shifted. Where there had been a bond of tension and uncertainty, there was now purpose. Jack had retaken his ground not through brute force, but by orchestrating every legal, emotional, and psychological move like a military operation. Clarissa and Nathan know. Jack corrected himself. Noah Barrett had thought they were playing chess. They hadn't realized they were standing on his board playing by his rules, each move already anticipated and countered. As the day unfolded, Jack drove Ellie and Ben to their favorite pancake place downtown. They laughed at a corny joke from their server and argued over who got the last bite of whipped cream. For a moment, Jack allowed himself to breathe. The pressure wasn't gone, but the fight had turned. Later that afternoon, while the kids were busy with their schoolwork, Jack retreated to the hidden command center behind the library shelves. The room, originally a storage closet for his grandfather's war memorabilia, had been transformed into a high-tech nerve center. On the screens were surveillance feeds, one from outside the Asheville cabin, another from Clarissa's newly rented apartment, and a few still monitoring the gallery that had become a crime scene. Jack clicked on a folder labeled Operation Barrett. Inside were transcripts, email captures, and images taken by private investigators he had hired months ago. Among them were damning emails Nathan had sent to a woman in Seattle, his next target a recently widowed philanthropist. The emails dated back to before Clarissa had even filed for divorce. A quiet alert pinged on one of the screens: an arrest made in Asheville. Jack opened the live feed just in time to see Nathan being placed in handcuffs by the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department. A deputy read him his rights while another handed Clarissa an eviction notice. She stood frozen in the driveway, mouth slightly open, phone shaking in her hand. Jack didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in this part, but Clarissa wasn't a villain, at least not in the traditional sense. She was someone who'd lost her way, made a series of selfish choices, and aligned herself with the wrong person. That didn't absolve her, but it did make her human. The same couldn't be said for Nathan. Jack's phone buzzed. A voicemail. From Clarissa. You win, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm leaving town. Just let me say goodbye to the kids. Please. Jack deleted the voicemail without listening to the end. That wasn't how this worked. She didn't get to walk out and parachute back in when it was convenient. Not anymore. Instead, he called her back. You want to see them? Sign the revised custody agreement. Give me full legal and physical custody. Find a job. Be consistent, be a mother, and stop acting like a victim. Clarissa's breath caught on the line. And if I don't, then we proceed to the next phase. Full termination of custody rights. And trust me, I already have the paperwork drafted. She signed the next day. Over the following weeks, Clarissa did what Jack demanded. She moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment near the school district. She took a part-time job teaching art at a community center. Twice a week under court supervision, she saw Ellie and Ben. The children were cautious at first, especially Ellie, whose sense of betrayal had run deep. But slowly, guardedly, Clarissa began showing up on time, bringing homemade snacks, helping with school projects. She didn't ask for more. She didn't beg. She simply tried. Meanwhile, Nathan Barrett, alias Nathan Bell, was denied bail. Prosecutors furnished with files Jack had forwarded anonymously charged him with multiple counts of art fraud, grand larceny, and identity manipulation. The gallery board issued a public statement cutting ties with both Nathan and Clarissa, and the local paper ran a feature titled The Art of Deception: How a Southern Gallery Was Nearly Brought Down by One Man. Jack watched it all unfold from his study but never gloated. He still had cameras, still had files, but he was slowly turning them off one by one. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Charleston's skyline, Clarissa came by for a scheduled meeting about the kids' summer plans. She brought no lawyer, no tricks, just a simple notebook with calendar notes and ideas. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she once told him she needed space to feel again. This time she simply said, "I'd like to plan one day a week with them. Hiking maybe? Or the beach. Just time." Jack nodded. "We'll work it out." She looked around the remodeled kitchen stripped of her old color palettes. "How did you plan all this without me ever seeing it coming?" Jack took a slow sip of coffee. "Because you assumed I wouldn't fight. That trust," she began. "My grandfather created it," Jack said. "But the clause about divorce that was added after I found your emails." Judge Lowell expedited the filing. Clarissa shook her head, blinking back emotion. "You ruined my life." "No," Jack said quietly, his tone final. "You did that. I just made sure there were consequences." When she left, Jack returned to the secret room one last time. On the wall were two photos, one of his old military unit in Afghanistan. The other recent, he and the kids roasting marshmallows at a state park, smiling without effort. One by one, Jack powered down the monitors. One by one, the feeds went dark. The mission was complete. It was nearly summer in Charleston, and the Monroe Legacy House had begun to feel alive again. Not with parties, not with gallery patrons or polished wine glasses, but with something far more enduring routine. The scent of pancakes on Saturday mornings, the sound of sneakers on hardwood, the hum of a family slowly stitching itself back together. Jack Monroe stood at the base of the staircase, watching his son Ben zoom a toy car along the banister while Ellie sat at the dining table working through math problems. The tension in their shoulders was easing. Laughter came more often now, though it still had a hesitation to it, like they were waiting for it to be taken away again. Jack understood that too well. That kind of pain doesn't evaporate. It settles quiet and lingering in the background. Down the hall, the room behind the library shelves remained Jack's private domain. The screens were still there, but muted. Most of the feeds had been disabled. He left one camera active outside Clarissa's apartment, not for revenge, not anymore, but for precaution. He had seen what emotional instability could become when paired with desperation. And for now, she was still rebuilding. Clarissa had kept her word. She moved into a modest apartment in West Ashley, far from the gallery scene and its burned bridges. Her job at the Community Arts Center paid little, but it was honest work, and the kids noticed. Twice a week, under the watchful eyes of a social worker, she met with Ellie and Ben for 2-hour visits. She brought watercolors and storybooks and snacks she made herself. There were no speeches, no guilt trips, just presence. And for now, that was enough. Still, not everything was smooth. At the end of one Thursday session, Ellie returned home unusually quiet. She dropped her backpack in the hallway, went upstairs, and didn't come down for dinner. Jack waited until Ben was asleep before climbing the stairs to find her curled up on the floor, the light from her desk lamp illuminating tear-streaked cheeks. "She said you didn't fight hard enough," Ellie whispered without looking at him. "That you gave up too soon. That's why she had to take the house and us." Jack's jaw tensed, but his voice stayed calm. "She's trying to make sense of things her way, Ellie, but you need to know something important. I never gave up on you, I just chose to fight differently." By walking away, she asked, hurt lacing her voice. "By building a strategy that would protect you long-term," Jack said. He sat beside her. "Sometimes when you're outmatched emotionally, you have to outmaneuver instead of outshout. That's what I did." She looked at him, then her eyes searching for something. Truth maybe, or just reassurance. Jack continued, "I was at every parent-teacher conference, every doctor's appointment. I was there, you just didn't always see me. But I was always there." She didn't respond, but she leaned into his side and let out a long breath. That was enough for now. The next day, Jack called Dr. Samantha Reese, a child psychologist he had hired to help the kids process everything. Over coffee at a riverside cafe, they discussed Ellie's emotional turbulence. "Clarissa's trying," Dr. Reese said carefully. "But emotional scars don't fade quickly, especially when they're rooted in betrayal. Ellie doesn't trust easily anymore. She'll need consistency, predictability, clear boundaries." "I'm considering filing to reduce visitation," Jack admitted. "Not to punish Clarissa, but to give Ellie some breathing room." Dr. Reese nodded. "If you go that route, include my evaluation. I'll support the request professionally. But emotionally, Jack, she still wants her mother in some part of her life. It just has to be on her terms." Jack returned home to the smell of Ellie's banana muffins baking in the kitchen. Ben was coloring on the island counter. Things felt real again. Not idyllic, but authentic. That evening, Jack opened his laptop and began typing a petition to the family court, requesting a modification to the visitation agreement. The language was careful, not vindictive, not accusatory. He emphasized Ellie's well-being. Dr. Reese's observations and his desire to provide a stable emotional environment. He paused midway through and walked to the bookshelf, brushing his hand against the wooden panel that concealed the door to the old surveillance room. He hesitated, then pushed it open. The screens were still dark, save for one small window showing Clarissa entering her apartment alone, carrying a bag of groceries and a set of watercolor supplies. No one else. No chaos. Just a woman trying awkwardly slowly to rebuild a life she once destroyed. Jack stared at the feed for a long moment before clicking it off. He closed the door. That night, he found Ellie on the back porch watching fireflies rise above the hedges. She didn't say anything when he sat beside her. They just watched this quiet dance of light in the dark. "I'm proud of you," Jack said eventually. "You're stronger than you think." "So are you," she replied. The Monroe house, once a battleground, was now something else entirely. It was a healing ground. And Jack Monroe, a man who had spent his entire life preparing for war, was finally learning how to live in peace. At first, the leaks were subtle, quiet disturbances in the shallow waters Clarissa Monroe had hoped to rebuild her life upon. A vague tweet from an art critic, an anonymous forum thread suggesting that her role in the Westbrook Gallery scandal was more than naive association. But within 72 hours, the whispers became thunder. Clarissa woke one morning to 32 missed notifications. Her inbox overflowed with media inquiries, former colleagues demanding explanations, and furious emails from parents at the Community Arts Center. Someone had forwarded the full gallery investigation files uncensored to half the Charleston art world. Not forged, not fabricated, just released. And worse, far worse, were the images. Photos Clarissa had forgotten existed, taken from hotel room mirrors and gallery offices. Her hands wrapped around Nathan's neck, his lips on her collarbone, stamped with date metadata from months before her divorce. Images not fit for a courtroom, but devastating in the court of public opinion. Sitting at her kitchen table in a crumpled t-shirt, Clarissa clutched her phone and whispered, "Jack." But it wasn't a curse. It was an admission. Across the city, Jack Monroe stood at the bay window in his office, watching a summer storm roll over the horizon. Rain splattered against the glass in chaotic patterns, not unlike the storm now battering Clarissa's carefully reconstructed narrative. He didn't smile. He didn't sip whiskey. He simply stood, composed, while the wheels of accountability turned like a machine he had built months ago and wound up with methodical precision. The phone rang. It was Riley Knapp, a sharp-toothed journalist from Southern Grit, Charleston's most-read investigative blog. Jack didn't answer, but he had expected the call. Clarissa did. She agreed to an on-record interview, her voice hoarse when Riley arrived. The living room was dim, the furniture minimal. Her fingers trembled as she handed over a printout, an apology letter she'd written to the community center but never sent. "You realize," Riley said after reading it, "none of this paints you as a bystander." "I wasn't," Clarissa admitted. "I let it happen. I wanted to believe someone could see me. I ignored the signs. Why did you align yourself with a man like Nathan Barrett?" Clarissa hesitated. Then for once she told the truth. "Because I was tired of living in Jack Monroe's shadow. I thought if I could destroy the version of him everyone respected, I could finally matter." Silence. The recorder blinked steadily between them. "Do you still think that?" Riley asked. Clarissa shook her head, tears clinging to her lashes. "No. I think I destroyed myself instead." Later that day, Southern Grit published the interview under the headline, "The Artist's Confession. Clarissa Monroe Speaks." But it wasn't a redemption arc. It was a slow-motion car crash broadcast across social media feeds. The public had little mercy for a woman who tried to steal her children and legacy from a decorated veteran and failed. Back at the Monroe house, Jack sat in his den reading the article in silence as Ellie flipped through a comic book on the couch beside him. She wasn't paying attention to her mother's name trending on Twitter, but she didn't need to. "Are you mad at her?" she asked softly. Jack exhaled. "No, just sad. Because of what she said." "No," he said, folding the laptop shut. "Because she's finally telling the truth and it's too late to matter." That night, Clarissa stood in the rain outside the Monroe house. She didn't knock, just stood there, soaked through, holding a folder in both hands. Inside were medical records, school calendars, copies of Ellie's artwork from supervised visits, evidence that she was trying. Jack opened the door but didn't step aside. "I'm not here to fight," Clarissa said, her voice hollow. "I'm here to give you this." He took the folder but said nothing. "I told Riley the truth," she added. "Not because I want anything, just because I'm tired of lying." Jack looked down at the folder, then back at her. "Telling the truth after a fire doesn't put out the flames." "I know," she whispered. He didn't invite her in. He simply closed the door quietly. Back in the surveillance room, Jack switched on a screen. Clarissa had returned to her car. She sat there for a while, headlights off, drenched and unmoving. Then finally she drove away. Jack powered down the feed, this time for good. But the world didn't stop turning. The Charleston Gazette followed up with a Sunday cover story. The local PTA issued a letter banning Clarissa from volunteering, and the Westbrook Gallery Board filed a civil lawsuit against Nathan Barrett and Clarissa Monroe for reputational damage. Barrett remained behind bars, now facing federal charges. In the Monroe home, Ellie seemed to sleep better. Ben laughed more. The quiet was no longer eerie, it was peaceful. But Jack knew peace wasn't permanence. Peace was a perimeter, and he would guard it at all costs. The Monroe Legacy House had settled into something close to peace. Mornings were filled with the smell of cinnamon toast backpacks being zipped and the sound of Ben's sneakers slapping against the floor as he chased the school bus clock. Jack Monroe had structured everything with military precision, morning routines, therapy check-ins, meal planning, even a shared digital calendar for Ellie's homework and Ben's art projects. Stability, Jack knew, wasn't born, it was built, which is why the breach, when it came, hit like a breach in perimeter defenses. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Jack was finishing a call with Dr. Samantha Reese when his phone lit up with a notification: unauthorized activity, Charleston Preparatory School. His security system wired into the school's administrative interface had triggered a real-time alert. Jack's stomach dropped. He was already in the car before the second alert arrived: Clarissa Monroe present on campus, not scheduled. Charleston Preparatory prided itself on discretion and safety. Jack had selected the school not only for its academic strength, but for its unwavering protocols. Clarissa had been issued strict visitation guidelines, court-ordered, supervised, pre-approved, and never during academic hours. When Jack arrived, Clarissa was already seated inside the school office, her expression caught somewhere between frantic and furious. Ellie sat nearby, stiff as marble, arms folded tight, a tear dried on her cheek. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jack asked without raising his voice. Clarissa shot to her feet. "She wasn't answering my texts. I was worried. You've shut me out of everything. I have a right to see her." Jack didn't respond to her. He turned to Ellie instead. "Are you okay?" Ellie nodded slowly but wouldn't look at either of them. Mrs. Monroe arrived at the front office, unannounced, Principal Martha Kenner said, standing firm beside her staff. "She insisted it was urgent and asked to see your daughter privately." "I refused. I didn't make a scene," Clarissa snapped. "I just wanted to talk." "You violated a court order," Jack said flatly. Clarissa's face flushed. "You've turned them against me. You've made them think I'm some kind of monster." "No," Jack said calmly. "You did that on your own." The next day, Jack filed an emergency motion to suspend Clarissa's visitation rights for 90 days, citing emotional distress, violation of custody orders, and the destabilizing effect her behavior had on their daughter's psychological well-being. The hearing was expedited to Friday morning. The courtroom was quiet when Jack walked in with Elizabeth Granger at his side. Clarissa sat with a new attorney, a younger man with a worn suit and aggressive posture. He was the kind that substituted volume for argument. She was acting out of maternal instinct, he told the judge, not malice. Judge Patricia Lowell raised a tired brow. Maternal instinct does not override the law counsel, especially not when a minor's emotional health is on the line. Clarissa's lawyer leaned into an argument about trauma and reconciliation, about needing flexibility for growth. Jack didn't interrupt. He waited until the judge turned to him. "Mr. Monroe, you have something to add?" Jack stood slowly. "This isn't about punishment. It's about protection. My daughter is 12. She's trying to rebuild her sense of safety after months of confusion and betrayal. That stability is fragile, and last Tuesday it shattered again." He turned to face Clarissa, not with anger but with iron resolve. "You can't force healing. You can't show up whenever guilt overwhelms you and call it love." Clarissa looked down. Judge Lowell tapped her gavel once. "I am suspending visitation privileges for 90 days. During that time, Mrs. Monroe must complete a structured parenting course, attend weekly therapy, and submit monthly progress reports to this court. We will reevaluate at the end of that term." The gavel came down again. The matter was closed. Clarissa looked gutted. Outside the courtroom, she caught up with Jack in the hallway. "Please," she said, voice shaking, "don't make them forget me." Jack turned to her, the sharp lines of his jaw clenched but steady. "You don't get to beg for mercy when you've ignored every warning. You want to be part of their lives. Start by respecting the boundaries they need to feel safe." That night, Jack found Ellie on the porch again, this time curled under a blanket with Ben beside her. The kids were watching a lightning storm roll over the harbor, safe behind the glass. "Are we going to be okay?" Ben asked. Jack nodded. "We already are." For the first time in months, Ellie smiled, not the brittle smile of politeness, But something real. Back inside, Jack returned to his office, sat at his desk, and stared at the folder labeled Final Phase. He hadn't opened it yet. He hadn't needed to. But he would. Soon. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the last warning. A soft September breeze swept through the open windows of the Monroe Legacy kitchen. Jack stood by the counter, brewing a second pot of coffee, listening to the distant hum of the dishwasher and the laughter of Ben echoing from the backyard. It was a rare kind of quiet earned, not given. It had taken months of war, of legal battles, betrayal, and precision to get here. But this peace didn't feel like a pause. It felt like a conclusion. Clarissa Monroe arrived at 6:04 p.m. 3 minutes late, hair pulled back in a loose bun, wearing jeans and a gray cardigan that looked more worn than styled. She held a manila envelope and a notebook in her arms. Jack opened the door without expression. "Thanks for meeting," she said quietly. He gestured for her to enter. "You have 10 minutes. They sat at the long oak dining table, once their battlefield, now neutral ground. Clarissa set down the notebook and opened it to a color-coded calendar. "I put together a revised summer plan. Hiking days, museum visits, one beach trip if the weather holds, one day each week with the kids supervised. Nothing overnight. I'm not asking for that." Jack studied the calendar. Every detail was there: pickup times, locations, emergency contacts. No demands, no assumptions. He looked up. "Why now?" Clarissa folded her hands. "Because they need me in some way, even if it's small. And because I need them to see me trying, not running." Jack leaned back in his chair. "This doesn't erase what you did. I'm not asking it to." She hesitated, then continued. "I read the court transcripts. I watched the videos of the gallery board meetings. I know what I became. I want to be someone they don't have to explain away." Jack stared at her for a long beat. Then he spoke. "You lied. You manipulated our children. You invited a con man into our home, let him wear my clothes, sit at my table. You weaponized your loneliness and turned it into a campaign against your own family." Clarissa nodded, shame burning behind her eyes. "I know." "What changed?" he asked. Her answer was soft but steady. "They did. I saw how strong they're becoming. I saw how safe they are with you. And I realized that being angry at you doesn't make me a mother. Showing up does, every day." Jack said nothing. Clarissa reached into the manila envelope and slid across a new document, a voluntarily signed parental amendment. It gave Jack full legal and physical custody indefinitely, with only supervised visitation rights that Jack could modify at his discretion. He skimmed the first page, then the signature at the bottom. "I also talked to the school," she said. "I withdrew my appeal to be reinstated as a volunteer. I'm taking full responsibility for the campus violation. I've also enrolled in another parenting course. This one doesn't satisfy court requirements, but I'm doing it anyway." Jack placed the document down. "Is this part of some legal strategy?" "No," Clarissa said. "This is me finally understanding that redemption isn't a courtroom victory. It's something you build from scratch." There was silence between them, not awkward, but fragile. Clarissa stood. "I'll wait outside. If you're okay with the calendar, maybe the kids and I can talk in the yard." Jack didn't reply immediately. Instead, he picked up the calendar again, flipping through the careful structure, the clear effort. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was earned. A few minutes later, Clarissa sat on the porch steps. Ellie and Ben came outside, slowly, uncertain at first. Clarissa didn't reach for them. She didn't cry or try to hug them. She just sat and listened, talked about nothing in particular. Let them lead. Jack watched from the kitchen window, arms folded. After 20 minutes, Ben was showing her his Lego set. Ellie was nodding cautiously. It wasn't warmth, but it was contact. And contact was the beginning of healing. Later that evening, after Clarissa had left, Jack stood in the study and looked at the photos mounted on the wall. One was a black and white picture of his military unit in Afghanistan, young men standing beneath a tattered flag, eyes hardened by things no one should have to carry. Next to it, framed in cedar, was a photo taken just last week. Jack, Ellie, and Ben at the edge of the marsh, the dog jumping in the water, sunlight painting the world gold behind them. He wasn't smiling for the camera, he was smiling for them. Behind the wall, the hidden surveillance room remained but dark. Jack hadn't powered it up in weeks. No more feeds, no more dossiers, just locked doors and dust. He opened it, briefly scanned the quiet consoles, then flipped the final switch. Power down, mission complete. The next morning, he left early with Ellie and Ben. The car was packed with snacks, sunscreen, a Bluetooth speaker, and an old picnic blanket from years past. They were heading to Sullivan's Island for the weekend. No hearings, no phone calls, just ocean, family, and laughter. Clarissa would meet them there for a supervised visit. Jack looked into the rearview mirror at the two faces that made everything worth it. Some men wage war to win. Others fight so they never have to again. Jack Monroe had done both. And now finally it was time to live.